resurrection again and stand beside you and all the other heroes of the faith and sing, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain." Thank you for that promise this morning, God, and that we're able to get a glimpse of heaven this morning. We love you and we thank you. It's in your Son's holy and precious name that we pray. Amen.
Good morning. Children's Church is dismissed at this time. I have two things I want to mention before I get into the sermon for today. One, my daughter will probably be a distraction for sure, but that's not the one announcement. The one I want to mention is we have, as of yesterday, a Lewis County celebrity with us. Gary Kidwell yesterday was recognized into the Lewis County Hall of Fame. And so Gary's been Gary serves on the board here at the church as a deacon and has continued to contribute to the things here at VCC. And so, Gary, congratulations. We know you've invested in a lot of students and a lot of people over the years. The second thing I want to mention is Project Merry Christmas is coming up, and many of you know I'm passionate about what Project Merry Christmas means. It's been a big part of my life, and especially now my ministry. And so one of the things that you can do to help with that is on Wednesday, we are going to gather all the toys from all churches and any organization and start putting them out in Clarksburg Christian Church, and we'll bag those up for each family. One of the things, so that's at 6 o'clock Wednesday. If you would like to volunteer, we could definitely use you. That's Wednesday the 14th. But the other part of that is that this year we've reached a record in our numbers. We are over 300 families signed up, and we've not met that 300 mark for several years to our knowledge. And so we know there's a need. We typically give out at least $10,000 a year each year, and so we know that's going to be more than that this year. The other side of that is we will desperately need toys, and so we try to give every child who is registered a gift, and also our senior citizens. So we're collecting toys here through the 14th. Out there's a table in the fellowship hall. So I want to encourage you to, while you're out, pick up an extra gift and bring it in. Or if you would like to donate by money, you can see me, or you can mail it to, I think it's P.O. Box 306, Vanceburg. So there's my advertisement for the day. But on the other side, we would love to have you volunteer. Even on December 17th, that's when we are passing out everything. So today we're starting the series called Next, and December is officially the Christmas season unless you are part of the Weddington household or the McClurg household, and I think you started in October. I think in October we had maybe 4 Christmas trees in our house, so a little early, but now it's okay to put up Christmas trees. Anybody else have Christmas trees up before Thanksgiving? Just a few of the crazies out there. I'm joking. But it's officially the Christmas season, and at the end of this year, it's kind of the season of next. And this season of asking the question, what's next? How do we plan for the next year? How are we planning for various things in our life? Talking about the dreams, the aspirations, goals. Like, who do we want to be and as we reflect back on the past year? December has this special feeling. It's the season of hope, the season of moving forward, but it's also a season where we want to acknowledge that it's difficult. It's a season where we're thinking about people who are no longer with us. We think about moments where maybe anxiety, depression, loneliness all hit, and I just wanted to stop before we get into the message and just say, we want you to know we're here for you. If you are struggling with any of those things and you need someone in your corner to sit with, to talk with, to call, we want you to know we're here for you. But also we want you to know that in our restrooms around the facility, there is some laminated sheets of paper that talks about, has different numbers, suicide prevention hotlines. It has other numbers that you can call to reach out and speak to someone if you don't want to speak to someone local. And so we know that there's a lot of people talking about celebrations and happiness and things during Christmas season, but we want you to know that
if you're struggling, that we understand that that exists, and we don't want to pass by that. So please, if you have questions or if you need someone to talk to, do that. I want to encourage each of us, if you're in the facility, if you're in the bathroom, to take a picture of that piece of paper on the wall. Because even though you may not be struggling with something this season, maybe someone else might call you and be reaching out to you, and maybe just sending that text could be a big deal and save someone's life. So as we get into the series, as we're talking about next, I want us to be thinking about how are we in our personal life thinking next? What's next? And as we talk about the series, there's a couple dynamics of that. Anytime we ask the question of what's next, I think we're kind of also looking back and reflecting on what has happened to lead us into this next chapter. I feel like this series is kind of the moment where we're in the driver's seat and we're looking in the rearview mirror behind us, but also it's in the moment where we're looking forward about what's going to happen and what are we walking into. And so as we plan, as we approach a new year, I think it's a time for us to look back. And in the Christmas season, one of the things that I kind of am thinking about in this season of next is that we talk about Jesus. We talk about the baby. We talk about what happened, so long ago with Mary and Joseph and as they traveled and everything that took place. We reflect on that. But it's also this moment as we build up and we read Scripture and we go throughout the Christmas season, we celebrate the fact that this baby, this Jesus, was born as our Savior. This moment where Jesus came and lived as an example, as proof of who the Father is. And as we look forward, we see that Jesus moved into a life where he was going to die and become our sacrifice. And we look forward by thinking about the kingdom. And so, as we're talking about the baby, as we're talking about Christmas, I'm reminded this season of childhood memories. Moments around Christmas trees or dinners and cars or even the food fights that take place in the house. Anybody? Just me? No? Okay. All right. And so we're reminded of those moments and what is going to happen. And for us, thinking about how can we create those moments for other people, especially Ellie this year. And so as you think about Christmas, you think about the various things that come up, the celebrations, the times together. And I'm kind of reminded as you look out into the world that even people who do not practice Christianity and follow Christ daily, during this season, they're talking about the baby. They're talking about the reason for the season. You see the banners, you see the moments where people are acknowledging that Jesus existed and that he's alive. And so maybe there's moments for us during this season to build up on that in relationships with other people and letting people know that this Jesus is the same Jesus who lived and died for us. But we understand that looking at what's next isn't easy because that means sometimes we're moving into unfamiliar territory, into something that's uncomfortable, something that's hard and difficult, something we're not familiar with. And so when we look through the Bible, this year our theme has been red line, and we've said from beginning of January that this theme, red line, if you look at Genesis to Revelation, this line continues all the way through every book. And it shoots out of Revelation and it continues into 2022. And along the line, we live in this. That we, in our journey, we find our way back to this red line of who God is and what he's wanting for us in our life. And as we're going, it's pointing right back to the kingdom. It's pointing us into the direction of being home. And so as we look through Scripture, as we see and read these stories, we're reminded of how the Father, how God has used people and pointed them back home, and how he's pointed them to show other people. And so today we're going to look at a book in the Old Testament. We're going to look at Joshua chapter 1 here in just a few minutes. But I've thought about this series of next, and I've thought about how God has continued to use people, and he's continued to speak into these people's lives to tell them, this is what I want you to achieve in the next chapter. And so I've thought about this, and one of the things I've done in my life, and maybe you have as well, is I've asked God to show me what's next, to prove to me what it is that he wants me to do in the next part of my life. And it becomes one of these moments where we've talked about recently that what happens is as God says, this is what I want you to do next, we say, I don't know if I want to do that because that's uncomfortable. It's not something I'm familiar with. I don't know if that's my idea of doing the things. And so as we look at Joshua here, we're reminded of something that we've talked about on Wednesday night called the Pentateuch. I would quiz those who were there on Wednesday, but I don't want to embarrass anyone if they don't remember what the Pentateuch is. But the Pentateuch is the first 5 books of the Bible, which are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And so the first 5 books of the Bible kind of give this description of the Mosaic Law, this moment where Moses comes, and it's essentially the story of Moses as if he was writing it, and portions that are believed that he did. And it moves this moment how God has a plan, and he's putting this story together of redeeming his people from the beginning. I like to read the Bible, and in the recent years, it's really become this moment for me to really understand that what's in Scripture is this continual story. That if you don't just read Genesis and think it's one story by itself, but as you read from Genesis to Revelation, this story of how God is continuing to intervene. He's continuing to show up, and he's continuing to reveal his plan. And so during the first 5 books of the Bible, you see this moment where God is called. He's called them out of this land into the new land, the promised land. And along the way, you see that things didn't go quite as planned. And I find it interesting as I'm thinking about the Old Testament and how people are listening to God and they're asking that question, what's next? That they see devastation and death and doubt. And that among the 40 years of wandering, that they continue to kind of walk almost in a circle, and they find themselves in this moment of questioning God. And they kind of have this image in mind that they're going to walk into this green field almost. And that, there's going to be rainbows and bunnies and deer drinking from the water and then butterflies. Everybody awake? I'm just checking you there, right? But it's kind of this moment that for the people, they felt like they were going to just walk right into the promised land and that it was going to be theirs and they were going to able to obtain this moment of what God said is going to be next. But as you read the story, you see that God is saying, it's my timing, not yours. Listen, obey. Follow what I'm talking and telling you to do. And so as we read through the story, and in this one big moment of God redeeming his people, we see that he's saying, listen to me, follow me, and I'll point you back home. So we're going to read Joshua 1. It says, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give to them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all of these days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead the people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will prosper and be successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people, get your provisions ready. 3 days from now you will cross the Jordan there and go into take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you of your own. But if I pronounce this wrong, someone can correct me. The Reubenites and the Gadites and half the tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the command that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you after he said, the Lord your God will give you rest by giving you this land. Your wives, your children, and your livestock may stay in the land that Moses gave you east of the Jordan. But all of your fighting men ready for battle must cross over ahead of your fellow Israelites. You are to help them until the Lord gives them rest, as he has done for you, and until they too have taken possession of the land the Lord your God is giving them. After that, you may go back and occupy your own land, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you east of the Jordan toward the sunrise. Then they answered Joshua, Whatever you have commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word and does not obey it, whatever you may command them will be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. I read this book and I'm thinking about the Old Testament. I'm thinking about what's leading up to this moment, leading up to how God is using people, and he's telling people, follow me. You're going to go into something that's unfamiliar. You're going to go into this place that's not something that you are going to think and find to be something so easy. But he uses Abraham and Moses and now Joshua and others to get into this next chapter of what is going to be for them, to go into the promised land. But we see that although Moses is kind of following after what God is saying, and he's saying, you are going to be the one to lead people on to the promised land. That right before you read this and at the end of the Pentateuch, that Moses is giving his final wishes, saying, I'm not going to get to see the promised land. My time is coming to an end. But God was able to take Moses and Abraham, and he got to use them in a way that would eventually lead others into the promised land. See, during that 40 years of wandering, some of the people who thought they would get to just walk into this new land and things would be great kind of found that they never would see the promised land, that they would die before them. In this chapter, we see how God is continuing to move his people in big ways, and he's using people that maybe never would have been expected, people who he continued to say, you are going to be part of the next chapter. They continued to follow the plan and follow the direction that God was leading them, but they wandered away, and they wandered back, and they questioned, and they continued to say, God, what is it that you are wanting us to see? I find it interesting that each time as they would have packed up their stuff, it wasn't like they just had a U-Haul and they can call the movers to come in to move them each time, that as they would pack up and move the tabernacle, and they would move each thing from place to place to place, that they had to do it out of trust. That God continued to say, trust me, I'll give you the food you need. Trust me, and I will show you what it is that I want you to do. But as they would go and they would continue to question and continue to doubt, but then God would show up and show them, I'm still here with you. And this chapter kind of gives me this moment of looking at how God is saying, I can use even you later on, that the next may not be what you think is going to happen next. But there's these steps that they continue to move into the promised land, and they're told, leave your wives and your children and your livestock behind. That you now are going to go, and you're going to go into this new territory, and you have to earn, and you have to fight, you have to obtain this promised land. I think sometimes we have in our mind that when God says, here's what's next, that it's going to be easy. But I think God also looks and he says, I want you to earn it. I want you to work for it. I want you to really rely on me in faith, that what I'm telling you to do, that I can do, but I need you to experience it and live it. And so throughout Genesis and throughout the Old Testament and New Testament, we see moments where God says, go, do the next thing, be part of this next chapter. I'm going to challenge you. You'll be tested. You'll learn how to grow and truly rely on me. And we see in the chapter, it says, be courageous. Be courageous. Be courageous. Have faith. Trust and obey. I kind of joke that I'm not going to sing the old hymn, Trust and Obey, because you don't want to hear my voice, but that's what I keep thinking of, trust and obey. I'm reminded of a song that we've sang here. It's kind of this song that talks about the moments of not being able to see what God is doing, but I'm here, I'm trusting, and I'm listening. And so in the Old Testament, in this story, God is using people, and he's pushing them so that eventually we would have this story of his son coming by a baby in unexpected places and unexpected times. And I'd imagine that there's this moment for Mary and Joseph where their life seemed very chaotic, and they continue to ask God, why would you want me? But throughout, we see moments even when God challenged people and said, this is what I want you to do. The question of what's next, how, comes up. They ask God that question, but they listen. They obeyed and they were courageous, even though it wasn't necessarily all in all of their timing, but they would get there. That God's plan was something beyond what some of them would even see. Because what happened, they walked into this moment where it was uncomfortable. This week, I was studying and thinking about what's happening in this chapter, and one of the things that I kind of thought about after reading was this moment where some of the people didn't want to leave when they were called to go and find this promised land. They wanted to stay back even though the conditions were awful sometimes. They wanted to stay back because it was comfortable. They didn't want to walk into the uncomfortable territory that they didn't know what would happen. And I think about that, and I think sometimes we are the same way. We don't want to walk and really understand who God is and what God is wanting for us because it's uncomfortable. See, we have this moment where God shows up, and in this Christmas season, we're reminded of Jesus. We're reminded that he came to be the redemption for us. He came to be the ticket. He came to show us and be who the Father wants us to be. And so he shows us, this is how I expect you to live. He teaches. He leads by example. And he goes to the cross and he dies because he says, this is my end so that the next thing for you could be eternity. And so I wanted to mention that here at VCC, we believe in the Father. We believe in the Son, and we believe in the Spirit. And as we're talking about the Christmas season, I want you to understand in the next chapter that we believe that God has a plan for you and for each of our lives, and that you will get to be part of something that maybe you'll never get to see completed, like Moses. But that he has a plan for you, and in this moment of life, and he's saying you get to be part of something greater. We believe that God uses many people and has through the very beginning of VCC and even way before that, so that VCC could even be in existence where we're at today. We, from the leadership, truly believe that God's not finished and that he's continuing to show up and continuing to put people in our paths and in your paths to continue the mission. Someone during a conference had said, you're 1 year away from a breakthrough in your ministry. And I started questioning, what does that even mean? 1 year away from a breakthrough in your ministry. And as I've kind of thought about it and thought about who is ministers, what is ministry, I started thinking more about the fact that every single one of us act as ministers, whether we're paid or not, whether you're in a school system or a hospital or you're out mowing grass or whatever your career or job might be, that you get to minister to people as well. And this statement that you're 1 year away from breakthrough in your ministry might mean that a year ago, you started ministering to someone. And just now, in this moment, you're starting to see growth. You're starting to see the seeds that you planted so long ago starting to grow. It might be that 1 year from now, from today, that the things that you are working towards, you will get to see a breakthrough. You'll get to see how God is using you to be able to lead that. And so we don't really know maybe what that breakthrough is. We may not ever actually be the person to get to experience that as where someone else will. And so we ask the question, what is that? What is a breakthrough? What moment and how is God going to use me? And when I think about that, I say, what? And I say, I don't know. And I think as God looks, he says, I don't want you to know all the details. You don't need to know the moment that a breakthrough is going to happen, but you work towards it. You prepare, you lead for that to happen. For several years, the leaders at VCC have been continuing to pray and asking God, what's next? And by that question, we are asking God, what is the next breakthrough? What's the next year of ministry going to look like for the church, for individuals, for families, for the congregation, for the community? We continue to ask this question and being mindful that God's voice and direction is maybe not quite what we were thinking. We ask God for what's next in a way that we're hoping that we actually lean and listen, even though it's uncomfortable. Like the people in the Bible, the answers aren't always clear or what's expected, but he continues to lead when we are faithful and we're continuing to allow him to guide. As you look through the desert wanderings, you see the moments where they wandered, and some of them grew tired and frustrated with God. asking what's next, expecting that it would happen immediately. And God says, just go. As mentioned, we've been praying at VCC among the leadership that of that question of what's next. How can we continue to make the best decisions for the church? How can we continue this mission? See, the part of the church here is two things. One, to feed, to nurture, to grow those who are believers. But the next part is to equip people to become disciple makers, to go and tell others about who Jesus is, to teach and to baptize. And so those are two of the most important things that we get to do as a church because of Jesus and because of what we've been left behind. In this past year, we've got to see a lot of growth in a lot of areas. We've got to add the leaders to the leadership board. We've taken our programming and we've tried to be more intentional, and we've tried to build new structure so that we can take and be effective for you and for others. We reintroduced Sunday school in August, and I wasn't real sure what would happen, but we've had nearly 60 people in every class each week, which is a pretty big success. I was doing some math. I think it's about 50% of people who are here on a Sunday are in a Sunday school class. So that's pretty good. It's been such a good thing that the seniors in denial class, the adult class downstairs, they had so many people in there that I thought maybe they converted it to a sauna because it was so hot in the room. And I won't mention the age group again, but, many of them were sitting on the floor, so that could be an issue. But some of them have switched classes because the classes are too full. And so that's been a positive thing. That's been something that's been exciting this year, of being able to continue what has happened for years to get back into that. We've seen new faces in our worship services for many, many months. Almost every Sunday, it's like I'm trying to meet someone or get acquainted with someone. I hope we've done this, and this has been a big challenge of mine, is that over the past 2 years, that as we come here, that every single one of us, even the oldest of us, has something we can take away and we can grow so that we can be better followers of Christ, so that we can grow deeper and we can be more nurtured in the fact that when we go, we can tell others and teach others. Behind the scenes, as I mentioned, we've been working on structures and policies and various things, and some of that we were able to reveal on our vision evening, some of the goals and things that we're hoping for and looking towards. Recently, we hired Faith Barnett as our full-time, and where she's going to serve as worship pastor and children's pastor. And we've already seen great things happening because of that. This year, we were able to purchase the grass lot just beyond this wall here, along with the lower section of apartments, which would be the west of the church, I think, if my direction's right. We were able to buy that, and as we think through the past year, and we think back, and as we're looking in the rearview mirror, that God has continued to show up and He's continued to guide us. He's continued to allow us to ask that question of what's next, and He's continued to answer and show some of those things we're not quite sure what that next means. But He's guided us in a way that He's guided all other churches in our community and around the world, and all throughout the people throughout the history, continuing to say, I'm with you. We, like many others, continue to improve listening to God. And years ago, one of the things that took place that I wasn't a part of, and before I was even coming here, the church was able to buy the property on the corner where the Gerald's home was. And they were able to rent it out and be able to retain some income because of that. And in the recent years, we were able to tear it down to have more parking, to have more space, and have even been able to have events there. In recent years, we were able to purchase the home that sat behind the parsonage and tear it down and expand our parking. I started looking at some documents in the past year and found one that showed that in the early 2000s, the church was attempting to buy, or wanted to buy, the Ginn property, and I think that even happened beyond that date. And so we kind of thought at one point we would not ever be able to buy it, but now we were able to obtain a part of that. And so the plan has been thinking about what's next. How can we continue to use what we have here to minister to people here in our community, to grow each of us spiritually? As worship styles and various things have have changed over the years. We've seen even improvements here in the church. If you look in the in the foyer here, you'll notice that the stage was like a very small portion of what we see today. And I think Renee told me that they used to be able to seat 300 people in this facility, which is crazy. But as things progress and as, styles of worship change, the stage has been added. We've added more instruments. We've added more people on the stage. And at some point in the history of the church, someone said, what's next? And they said, we've got to add on. We need bathrooms. We need classroom spaces. We need a place to have fellowship dinners. And so now we have, the addition back here. In 2016, we started seeing growth at the church, and we reached out to a guy named Paul Snoddy, a church consultant at the time, and he came in, he visited with us, he did surveys, and continued to kind of give us some input on what could we do to better improve who we are in reaching the needs of our people in our community. And we started continuing to think through that question, and in 2017, we were asking the question of, all right, we're close to the 200 mark. What do we need to do to be able to allow everyone to fit into services? What do we need to do to maybe get to that point? Somewhere within those couple years, we added the second service, and so we've had 9 o'clock service and 11 o'clock service. We started meeting for Christmas and Easter at the Lewis County High School auditorium, and we'd kind of start filling up the space there, and kind of this idea that we want it to be in one service again. In 2019, we had the elders, the staff, and our spouses all go to Blue Licks Battlefield for a brief weekend retreat where we kind of ask the question, what's next? What are we doing currently that's great and well or poor, and how can we improve systems and various things so that we could be better, effective communicators for the gospel? How can we reach more people and baptize and share and make new disciples? Obviously, in 2019, we didn't know a few months later that, COVID would hit and it would change the whole dynamic of churches across the world and business and the life that each of us lived. And while we were able to come back and meet in the parking lot and eventually meet in the facility, a lot of churches were permanently closing their doors because they couldn't afford to meet. And so in 2021, we took advantage of the opportunity of being out and being back online, and we were able to put new carpet down and paint and make some much-needed repairs to the ceiling and the walls. And so we continue to facelift. We continue to use our facility the best that we can, although it's continued to be one of those things we've outgrown. In 2019, in that meeting, we walked away with this idea that our facility is kind of limiting us. It's kind of causing us this moment of how do we reach more people? How can we get more people in our classes? How can we teach more people? And so, obviously, over the last few years, we've been asking that question, and as we walk into this facility, we get to look and see the beautiful woodwork and the stained glass window. Recently, walking through the facility with someone, they were talking about how beautiful, this building was, just the old part of it and the things that are unique about it. And so, in speaking to an architect, we had someone come and walk through the property and asking, what is it that we need to do here to make it continue to be effective, to continue to allow it to be a safe place? And so we learned several things, and one of the things we learned is that the next step for us in trying to answer that question is to have a survey completed of our property to understand where the floodplain is and what that may look like for us. But also to have a structural engineer come in and evaluate all aspects of our current facility, because we know there are some issues that may need addressed in the future. One of those is that we have aging wiring throughout the building that's a concern. We know that the brick on this part of the building is old and brittle, and that some of the mortar is actually coming loose. We've continued to have water issues seeping through the brick, and even in the basement from some plumbing issues. We recently learned that we're going to have to replace one of the main, sewage lines coming into the building, which could mean a lot of parking lot coming up, even some basement coming up to fix the issue. Another part of that is we've had continued issues with our heating and cooling units on both sides of the facility, which may mean that they need updated as well. And so on top of that, we know that elderly and disabled are hard to get in and out of the building. So there's a lot of questions that we're kind of trying to think through and ask, and most importantly, ask God, what's next? What is it that we can do with what we have and the resources we have available to continue to meet the mission of the church of teaching and growing and nurturing, but also reaching new people? And so with all that being said, we're going to continue asking God to lead us, direct us, and guide us. But also with that said, we're going to say one of the next things for us is to start a building fund here at the church. You may wonder, what does that mean? And from the leadership perspective, I'll say, we're not sure. We don't know, okay? But we know that God is leading in a way that we know we need to take care of some things here probably, and potentially make some adjustments to be able to continue the mission. And so our goal, as I mentioned, is to continue to feed those who already believe, to grow, to nurture, to allow God to use each of us, but also to continue to reach and make disciples in our community. So, talking about a building fund, there's a few ways that you could participate in that. One, if you want to give, there's going to be on our online giving a section on there that says building fund. You can give online. A second way is you could write a check and put it in an envelope and in the memo write building fund and drop it in our offering boxes. A third way is that on Christmas, starting this year, everything that comes in to our offering is going to go straight into a building fund, and the same thing for Easter. And so if you give on Christmas or Easter, those will continue to go into the what's next category, essentially. So as of now, we're still seeking. We're still asking God, what is it that we need to do? How is it that we can be the best stewards of God's money and be able to continue to pour into people? We're uncertain of, what that looks like. We're uncertain of, a lot of the big steps to take place, but we're currently continuing to pray and seeking one step at a time. And so we've not set a goal of an amount that we're expected, but we're seeking out those options and directions of what we may need. So how can you partner with us? Maybe a question, and here's a couple things I want to encourage you. First, no matter where you're at in your life, here's one of the biggest things that we need and we would love for you to be a part of. We'd love for you to partner with us in praying and asking God to reveal what is needed for the next chapter. What is needed for this facility? What is needed, maybe, who knows, for a future facility? We're not sure. But asking God to continue to be feeding into the leadership and the staff and the people here at the church to point us in a direction that tells us that this is what needs to happen to continue to build the kingdom. We ask for you to pray for the leaders in working through that and whatever that looks like. And we're asking for you to pray that each of us will be willing to listen to whatever that plan is that God has for us. A second way that you can partner with us is obviously to give if you're able to. Maybe in the next season for you, it's asking and thinking about how can I give beyond my tithes and offerings towards this next thing. We also understand that that's not feasible for everyone, and not every family is going to be able to do that. We get that, and so we want you to know that's okay if you're not able to. But we want you to know also that you're part of God's plan in VCC because you are also our teachers. You're the ones who are coming. You're the ones leading. You're the ones, feeding people outside of this building. And so the last thing I want to ask as for you to be a partner for us is to continue to show up. Continue to get involved. Continue to seek after God and asking God, how can he use you individually at VCC to make disciples, to teach people, to baptize people? Because most importantly, that's the goal, is to be continuing to build the kingdom. And so I say all of that to say, from the scriptures we read this morning, is that God has a plan. And that plan's already in place, and it may take years and years and years for that plan to ever be revealed to us. And sometimes we have to understand that God's timing is not our timing, and our timing is not God's timing. But we continue to be involved in a way that is asking God to shine and show us and point us so that we can continue to be the best stewards we can. The last thing I'll mention is that maybe for you, you think about this series of Next, and you're thinking about what's next? And maybe for you, it's to be spiritually involved, praying to the Father, inviting him in, asking, how can I build the kingdom in my life, in my community, in my family? Maybe for you, it's the next step of getting baptized and being committed to the Father in that way, or maybe even placing your membership. And so I know it's like 12 o'clock and everybody's hungry and ready for dinner, so that's going to kind of be my wrap up. I'm not going to sing, and the worship team's not going to come back up, so you all can go get your lunch. But the one thing I want to say is, if you have questions, talk to me. I'd be glad to sit down with you. The leaders would be glad to sit down. But I do say, we're not sure what's next. We're just trying to prepare and allow God to lead us in that direction and speak in a big and bold way. So let me pray. If anyone has questions or you have a decision to make, I'd love to talk to you after service. Let's pray. God, we want to say thank you for allowing us to be part of your story. We understand that from the beginning of time that you had a plan. That plan isn't always clear to us. It's not always something we're comfortable with. It's not always something that we are open to. But we know that ultimately that your plan, that your decision is what matters. And so as we go into this Christmas season, Father, we ask for you to allow each of us to be an example of your Son. Allow us to pour into other people in a way that is shining and showing the love, the grace, and the truth that you continue to speak through people. I pray that we get to be a part of a movement within history to bring people to you and to build the kingdom up. I ask that as we go into this next chapter of the Christmas season and also this next year as a church, God, that you will guide us and direct us, and that whatever it is that we need to do, that we'll be open to and we'll be willing to listen to you, and that you will continue to pour into us. So God, be with the leaders, be with our teachers, be with each person who continues to be part of what you're doing through us here at VCC. We thank you for your Son, and thank you that we get to celebrate this moment. In your Son's name I pray. Amen. Have a great day. Eat some food for me.